It's probably my bad. Probably asked for the link like 5 minutes ago and I didn't even notice. So good morning. Hopefully you won't hear too much commotion behind me. We've got it's summer vacation. The dogs and the kid are celebrating from the sounds of it. So I'm not sure how noisy that'll be, but I'll mute myself when not talking, so we'll be all right. Just as we're getting started here today, as I mentioned, we have a USDA report out in about an hour and a half. Carl and I will be giving that insight, giving a live update on what the numbers have to say and what is coming out of that. So we'll definitely be doing that. But first, to get started, as I get my house in order here, Nick, let's go to you and just kind of let's start with the weather update. Could we? What it is that you're seeing globally while we wait for Eduardo to get here too. Anything worldwide that you think we should be paying attention to from a weather standpoint? And maybe a comment too, if you could, on the performance of these 11 to 15 day models and why at this point we might as well just throw them in the circular file.
Yeah. So world stuff, I mean, the two places to be watching here are the US, just if this heat in the Western Corn Belt can start to work into, more of the Midwest. We kind of been commenting on that for a few days. One model takes it in, one takes it out. Again, if it starts to set up over, that gets a lot more interesting. And I think Europe, if this French forecast rolls forward and it's northern Germany now is dry, some of those are like specific export markets, and that's where you're growing for. So Spain's very
I was
dry.
just going to ask, is Spain still problematic? I mean, Spain, I always kind of look at because they're our largest export or importer, right, in the EU. And they've been hot and dry as of late. Are they still looking at the same sort of forecast?
Yeah, and they do have some more rain now, not so much in the corn area, but and they're hot. But the bigger one there is kind of Ukraine, because if Ukraine has a big crop, then the US isn't probably going to get a lot of that business. And again, like I don't put a lot of weight into the anecdotal stuff people report early in the season. You can always find a field to take a picture of. But having said that, Ukraine was just the amount of stuff, disruptions, the war, the thefts, like there's enough problem or potential problems that I think you have to take, the potential for 10 to 15% lower production in Ukraine seriously. So I think the EU is now worth watching, and that would quickly 2 weeks from now be much more of a corn story.
How about China? Seems like things are moderating a bit, you could say, but we've seen their cash corn prices kind of on the rise there, and there's a pretty sharp inverse as you look forward, Sep, Jan kind of mindset there. Obviously, farmer selling's been aggressive, but anything on the weather front, it looks like more rain, maybe some cooler temperatures in the northern plain where the problems have been, but is there too much rain in parts of China?
I don't think so, not in June.
Okay.
Especially after it's been dry. No, we actually just said like Russia and China just look pretty good. They're just in better shape. I think again, Russian numbers could offset anything in Ukraine, and if things are good from here, China's the heat's there's a lot of heat out west stays there. A lot of the country's wet in the south. It's been. And it looks like most of it, the main area that was kind of dry in Mongolia is going to get rain. So there just isn't there's not much of there's no story there. Now the one thing is, somebody pointed this out and I looked a little closer and it does look like maybe wheat prices have bottomed there. So, if wheat prices have bottomed, there's a good chance that, grain prices have bottomed. So, let's and what's interesting there is like Argentina Rofex looks like the corn prices have probably bottomed there.
Mhm.
Beans look like this 275. They're going to find support. So I think from the standpoint, we're going to need to really start. We're going to need to make this U.S. crop before we talk about a lot of these or this northern hemisphere crop before we start talking about a lot of downside to these local markets.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great point. Eduardo, talking about weather. I've read some folks say that there's a third of the Brazil's safrinha crop struggling with that heavy, heavy rain. But then it doesn't At the same time, we have a little bit of theatrics or drama. We're looking for something right now, maybe to get this market snapped out of these doldrums. Is it legit? Are there concerns with a portion of the safrinha crop, or are any losses in the south going to be more than offset by the big yields in Mato Grosso?
Hey, hello, Angie. Hello, Nico. Hello, Carl. No, in Brazil, uh, we of course we have a too much rain at the south here in Paraná, south of Mato Grosso do Sul and São Paulo. The only thing is the slow maturing and slow harvest. In the center of Brazil, we have no rains in forecasts, and the harvest just started in Mato Grosso. Freights are moving up, and we have corn on the ground, like in 23. But the answer is no problem. The only problem, which is good to avoid a concentration of the logistics, we are going to have a slow motion harvest south of Brazil and a good speed from now on in the center of Brazil.
So let's talk about Mato Grosso and corn on the ground. When we talk about corn on the ground in the US, we put corn piles out all the time. They're meant to be there. Is this sort of same process in Mato Grosso, or when you say corn on the ground, are we just dumping it out behind a barn? Like, are these specific ground piles set up to store because the market is telling the commercial or telling the farmer or whoever is doing this to hold on to these bushels, or is it because they simply have no place else to put them? When the first, just anecdotally, the first year I was in Iowa, Carl's co-op that he worked for at the time literally would dumped corn in 2000, what was it, 16. They in the parking lot of the local crush plant with the intent of it being picked up by the end of November. But literally the first time I saw an emergency corn pile in on the dirt in Iowa, I kind of was surprised. So are we dumping it in the parking lot, or is it's something that is intended to hold corn for a bit longer than a couple of days?
It's the first scenario. They dump corn in the parking lot waiting for shipments because
Okay.
the idea is we have a lot of beans up there in Mato Grosso, around Brazil.
Yeah.
In Mato Grosso, we still have a lot. In the at the farmers, but at the commercial warehouses too. Do the silos of the tradings, because most part of the tradings are finishing the soybean program up north and starting only with handle only corn. So we have a lot of beans. We have a huge a safrinha, and the only way um, to accommodate all the corn is pulling up on the corn, waiting for the shipments. But this shipment should be July, so it's not the idea to hold the corn on the weather to wait, for example, to sell at the end of the year.
Hmm.
Of course, I think Silos Bag will do this job, and I expect the usage of silos bag this year in Brazil overall will be the largest ever. The
Okay.
last year was the record, and
Yeah.
this year should be larger than that. We have to keep an eye on the imports from China, the silo bag, and the point is we have a lot of beans to move. The farmer selling is very slow, and the safrinha is very big. So ground is the only way.
And it's ground for a short period of time, but
Yeah,
ground nonetheless. The market is telling you to hold on to it for a minute, and you're going to figure out how to do that, or you have the bushels committed. Um, what are you seeing? Are there any thoughts in changes on the Brazil export program? We saw CONAB today raise their production estimate, but they left exports unchanged for corn. what are your thoughts on exports? I feel like, we talked last week and you had said 45 million metric ton. The USDA is at about 43 million metric ton. It feels like the market thinks that Brazil is double that. I feel like we're factoring in, maybe doubles excessive, but it feels like the market's trying to say a 50 million metric ton export program out of Brazil or something that's going to eat the US's book up. What are your thoughts though in reality, and how is currency affecting this still? Because the dollar's continued lower here over the last week.
Yeah, the point is it's very difficult to make everybody happy when the price is too low, because for sure we have a flat price in real per bag this year at the lowest level in 1 year. So it's below 40 real per bag. It was 55 2 months ago for the same window, not the spot for July and August and September also. So we had a big drop, and the farmers, they are not happy selling at this level. Of course, they have a good yield, but sometimes depends on the logistics, depends on the yield. It can't pay the bills. So no doubt, Brazilian farmers, they will sell what they need to do with they need to sell in terms of space or bills to pay, and then they will hold corn to the end of the year into the next year. And what they have to sell to pay bills or buy or purchase, the amount of fertilizer they need to should be beans. Um, so the combination of this, we have to pay attention. But the answer is, it's not good for exporter at this level, and the fact is affecting the replacement cost, which is increasing, and the freight are starting to move up. So the another point to pay attention. But the answer is, exporters, they are not making money, and this is very important to have a, a good estimation of the program. But my number is 45 million tons, because we need to. If farmers they hold forever, and then at the end of the year, OND or November, December, Jan, then we are going to have a very big problem, because we are going to have beans and a lot of beans coming. We have wheat in the south of Brazil, and we still have corn at the last year and this year. So no space. Um, so we need to sell, producers in Brazil, um, making money or losing money, whatever. And the window is important.
So
Hey,
they can base, go ahead, Nick, go ahead.
sorry. Quick question on that. So while in a former life, I had traded some cargoes off, into the US out of South America. And we had a similar setup. And I remember like I had, seasonally bought some super cheap 5, 10 under type stuff. And one of my contacts had kind of basically pointed out that like there was some of this was going to have to hit the market. So I puked. It was okay. We traded 95 under 2 weeks later. Do you see any chance, I know the higher freight probably, that actually, do you see any chance that there's any cheap opportunities into the US, or there's a chance that they blow, that this basis really comes apart for a period of time, or can the farmer sort of work through that? Any thoughts on if there's any opportunities for some really cheap basis here?
Out of the US or in Brazil?
Brazil, like South America, or even pressuring RG, say.
Yeah. I think so. I think so. Depends on the logistics, and then we may see some cheap corn moving up, and we have rail. So it could be a possibility to see rail companies giving a discount, because the take or pays are zero or almost that for the second semester. So they need to do something to attract demand, or they are going to lose part of their share to the trucks. That could be a possibility. For example, here in Paraná, and then you have no lineup. We have 5 days waiting time in Paranaguá, so it's very empty. Anyone could build a very good corn program throughout Paranaguá. But the point is, the Paraná corn is not that cheap, but could be. So I think the logistics in Brazil will do the job, and lack of storage will make Brazilian corn cheaper. And tradings are selling. For example, this week we had 5 cargoes traded in South Korea. One was Argentina, one for sure out of Brazil, and 3 could be PNW or Brazil, but we didn't see any trade in Brazil. Only one for late September. But all the regions sold at the same level, $235 around that per ton. So it's not going to be easy for anyone. The price will move down. Vietnam, for example, didn't booked only one cargo and waiting for further declining in the prices and indications below 230 per ton CFR. So it's moving down, and the cheapest will win this run. Let's see.
It'll be interesting. It reminds me right now the situation in Brazil, or as we anticipate the Brazilian harvest, it reminds me of August and September in the US last year. No one really wanted to commit too awful far out into the deferred time frame because we had this massive crop coming, right? And we all thought that basis had to get real cheap, and harvest basis did. I mean, we went from an 80 under, 50 under sort of value into an ethanol plant to 3 weeks later, though, we were trading 15 under because once the crop was put away, it didn't come back out for a hot minute. And then futures had to rally, of course. And then we had farmers selling that we had never really seen in quite some time. And so I'm going to continue to watch. I mean, Brazil harvest is only what, 5% complete at this point. When you're already talking about space issues in Mato Grosso. So obviously basis should fall apart. That's what every merchandiser and originator worth their salt is anticipating. The $1 million question is if it comes to fruition or not, because it feels like farmers have gotten very creative with keeping grain out of the pipeline, especially when you're well below your cost of production.
Yes.
They will figure out a lot of things we're selling. No, I'm not gonna make. We're selling whatever we can to not have to sell grain, or we're saying, you know what I mean? Like there's just some interesting dynamics in that. So it's be something to watch. Nick, what are you gonna add?
No, no,
Something.
it's like, yeah, no, exactly to that point, the moves are just more shorter lived. They happen fast, sharp, a little earlier, and they're over quick.
Yeah, that's what you get the opportunity, and it might be gone in a day. All driven by farmer sentiment and all of that fun stuff. For sure. Uh,
And the
yes.
Argentina corn farmer selling is very slow. So in July they need to sell something because they are only selling beans, and which is very has been very big. So Argentina needs you to come to the game and sell and guarantee some demand out of Asia. So and Ukraine, but
And that's
depends on everything.
and that's kind of my point about if Brazil really lays into this market and the Argentine has to chase them, do you get do you get a period here of some cheap basis, especially around this end of month uncertainty on the taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's what we're all counting on at this point. And so it'll definitely be something to watch. And really should happen. Logistically speaking, from a grain flow standpoint, the greatest pressure on cash happens as, to me it's not the first 50, 60% of the crop that's difficult to put away. It's the last 20. That's when you start to really just beg people if it's big enough to take it or get rid of it or what have you. And so that would be probably when we see those greatest opportunities out there. Um, talking about currency and taxes, the retention taxes, and all of these other factors at play. Nick, what are we seeing? There's been some rumor that potentially you could see it extended. To me, I feel like you're not going to see an announcement on the extension of the tax for, at least until after it's supposed to expire, because we're trying to generate business, right? We're trying to encourage the farmer to sell, which is why the tax holiday or whatever you want to call it expires at the end of the month. What are your thoughts on that, and what are you seeing from a currency standpoint overall, and how's that impacting movement?
Yeah, so, okay, couple things. First one is, it's not very often that a jail sentence gets influential, but, the previous president being, the Supreme Court basically upheld her 6-year conviction. So, that's a big deal, and it's very optimistic for Argentina to sort of, kind of draw a line here in the sand on corruption in government is why the bonds and, the financial markets responded well. As far as the, right now you're in a funny spot. I'm going to put out a paper in the next 2 days on this because it's actually a bigger situation in Argentina. Yes, they need the revenue. That's what the tax cuts are about. But at the end of the day, like, it's all about keeping inflation down till October 26th. And right now, Milei is on the offensive. This administration has beat Pro in Buenos Aires. They now have her basically removed from the race. You've got Kisselhoff, basically saying he doesn't know if he would pardon her. It's a lot of stuff is moving very positively for this government. So they're not going to meet any of the initial IMF targets. It is not a surprise. People will write and say, oh, same old Argentina. It's got nothing to do with it. Like, they've been given an all clear by somebody far above all this to, focus on winning these elections. So, I'd expect them to keep the currency strong. They're spending a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, supporting it routinely. But inflation ticked down to 2% monthly and should be under 2%, for June. It is hurting the economy a bit. But there are some bright spots. They just got a couple $2 billion revolving loan at 4.5% above SOFR rates, so 8.25%. This is the type of thing that's going to trickle into the economy slowly. The bigger thing here to keep in mind is that you've got 20 years of inefficiencies, of political friendships, bad customs deals, all these businesses that lived on false credit, false, government contracts that shouldn't have existed. And there's just going to be there's going to be defaults. There's going to be industries leaving provinces that never should have been there. So you're going to have there's going to be a larger reckoning in the background of Argentina coming. So we'll put out a piece on that just so, and honestly, it's good. It needs to happen. It needs to get cleaned up. I think that's kind of the fly in the ointment where we don't know if maybe they extend it simply because they want more of a buffer with some of these challenges that are coming over the next 90, 180 days. But again, all of that is kind of points to lower inflation, which right now is enemy 1, 2, and 3, as we've been saying for, a while. So Argentina's this government's in a good spot. And having said all that and talking about defaults and blah, 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 and it's actually kind of a good thing for me. Bigger picture, I mean, what the the messaging of the US administration is that this is going to quickly switch from a current account trade issue, which quite frankly has been a failure, to a capital account, revenue raising, asset price, function. In the tax bill, the remittances are sort of the first kind of shot at this, where money leaving the US for people who come is going to get taxed. They started at 5%. It's been watered down to 3.5%. It's going to be horribly hard to enforce, especially because a lot of people remitting are not citizens, and you're going to require the proof of citizenship. But having said that, guys, people who buy stocks, bonds, land, all of this, like that's easy to identify, especially foreigners. So, the idea that you're going to start to address capital accounts or the capital account and foreign flows, it's going to be a big deal. And that's what some of these things Besant's saying imply. In him talking about the 10-year and wanting lower rates and, managing the debt through interest rates. I mean, that's the definition of financial repression. So the release valve for all of this right now is the US dollar. They want higher equities. They want people to feel rich. That is the same as Trump 1.0 2020. It's effectively, I think the May deficit was $360 billion 1 month. This is all coming out in the currency. And so you've got now ag is going to stay competitive out of the US from a currency perspective. Most banks are forecasting a Brazilian real at 6 or 6.10 at the end of the year. It's strengthening right now because right now everything is sort of going to strengthen. And the only currency that really matters in all of this is the RMB, and it's sitting still. And, so that Trump can solve, or this admin, Bessent, can solve a number of things he wants to address, but you're going to end up with inflation, higher prices in real terms, and you're not going to have any real growth. And that has the only times you've had this scenario in the last 30 years in the US is 99 and 2000 and 2006, 7, and 8. And we all know how that went. So I do think this is going to get a lot more attention, and it's going to become a bigger factor into ag markets, and it's not something we usually pay attention to. So, we need to get acquainted quickly.
Been my argument for a minute here. Like, a lot of folks want to talk about how overshooting or overreaching new crop exports are. And if the currency stays entirely under pressure, if you see, just like we talked about, these sort of sudden movements of cheap values, but then, because the farmer is forced, his or her hands are forced, and you get a shot of supply, but then they can hold on to it for the rest of the time. Like, balance sheets are great, but grain flows, are what really kind of drives this. And so it could be interesting to see, just as you said, like, if the dollar stays cheap, the US stays competitive. And that's a different mindset than what we've had for the last few years, where we were the reserve supplier of the world because we were so much more expensive. So now we become not only the best quality, most reliable, we also are remaining incredibly competitive. In past years, we could command a premium to a certain extent for those two things. And now, but unfortunately, the world's end users are going completely hand to mouth. So you're not benefiting either from long-term demand at this point. So it's kind of an enigma, or kind of a dichotomy of interesting, I don't know. Anyway, yes.
The one thing it does change that, when you look at the way that the flows work with the modern buyer being much more quantitatively driven, is it will in fact change what is triggering the buys and sells of these types of players. And because the currency will become a driver when it has, that strong dollar, and, has just kind of had the opposite effect, where it's actually been kind of temping down commodities. It'll be kind of interesting to see here, how these the daily flows respond to it, because it will change. Like the signals are going to kind of start to key off other stuff.
Definitely something to watch. All right, we said we were going to hard stop at 11. I said I'd keep you guys to it. So, real quick, roundtable-y, as we go around, just our final thoughts. I'm gonna let Carl go first, since poor guy hasn't gotten to get a word in edgewise. So, Carl, things that you're watching or anything that you want to kind of throw out there this week?
I'm making it through my every week. I do radio shows regional across the entire Corn Belt, and it really comes in handy this time of year because I can hear from the ground crop reports, and I'm starting to pick up something really interesting out at southern Minnesota, northern Illinois, or southern Wisconsin, southwest Wisconsin, northwest corner of Illinois is getting dry, and that's been dry for the last couple of years. That's some prime corn ground there. I'm hearing the same thing out in Iowa. Hearing the same thing down by Omaha. Uh, Here's what everybody's saying. We're holding our own. We're getting rains, but we're dry. And the crop won't take heat. What's interesting, none of these people know each other. There is no crosstalk here. This is just reports I'm getting. I would say the Western Corn Belt starting to get a little concerned about the moisture and the heat that's forecast out there. North Central Iowa had a pretty wicked storm come through last night. Talked to some guys out there this morning, and you could smell corn silage in the fields. Hail took it out. So now you're faced with, do you replant or do you take insurance? One other crop report quick. This came out of Central Illinois today, that Bloomington, Decatur area. And they described their crop as phenomenal. Southern Illinois expected to see record abandonment. So just add one more caveat to try to figure out what this yield is going to be. You're going to have spots like Illinois where you're going to see 300 plus bushel averages, and then you're going to see crops disked under. So one more set of uncertainty to throw into this, but interesting to find them. I'll keep everybody updated as I keep getting those reports in.
Love it. Who wants to go next? Eduardo? I'll let Eduardo go next. I just said it, so
Okay.
I chose.
Yeah, in Brazil, we have to pay attention to the replacement cost and the freight role on this. And last year, the freights were not jumped because of the size of the crop, and the export program of corn was much smaller. So this year could be different, can be different. And so we have to pay attention in Brazil, the effects, if keep going lower, real getting more stronger and stronger, and plus freights are more expensive, then Brazil could be out of the game for some time.
That would be crazy. Nick, thoughts? Anything you want to add in?
No, I've said enough. We're good.
No, you've never said enough. My thoughts, I don't really have many. We'll see what the USDA report has to say. I am hearing rumblings that we will get both the Senate 45Z version or the 45Z verbiage tomorrow from the Senate bill, which should be supportive. And I'm also hearing talk from someone that I trust who has some insight or has connections. I will never tell who it is though. That the RVO number that we will get tomorrow is going to be something the industry is happy with. So there were some worries at the start of the week that that it was going to be less than we wanted. We'd heard that rumor yesterday, that ADM there was going to be a big EPA announcement last night that was kind of behind some of the rug pull, or behind what folks were calling the rug pull that ADM had done with the old crop bean basis. And it doesn't sound like the EPA, like that's found like that the two are not related, I guess, at this point. It does not sound like the EPA number is going to be overly negative, though we do have the SREs we still got to work through. So we'll watch. That's all what Eduardo had to say, I think is super important. I feel like I am a broken record, but we have to make sure that we watch balance sheets, we look at balance sheets, but there are tons of factors at hand that influence the actual movement of physical grain. Cash grain doesn't move, honestly. It oozes, and so it'll be something that we'll be watching as harvest progresses across Brazil. Basis and offers into the market, farmer selling pace, and all of that will be super key. And yeah, we'll be back next week. We'll see what the USDA numbers have to say. Carl and I will be live on Twitter Spaces at noon, for those of you that want to get the numbers as they're released. So otherwise, have a great week. We'll be back next week. Let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you.
See you. Bye bye.
Nice.